Julia's mom, Tammy, gets a phone call from Tim. He says Julia hasn't come home from shopping.
That same night, police discover a suspicious vehicle at the local park. The park is only 2 blocks from Julia's house.
Oh, I knew that she wasn't the kind of person that was going to take off without her child.
What happens to Julia Dawson would rock the village of Sparta.
No matter how old your child is, parents always worry about their children. Julia's mom, Tammy, knows she may have seen her alive for the last time.
Not far from the eastern shores of Lake Michigan sits the village of Sparta, a short drive north of Grand Rapids. First settled in 1844, the town doesn't go by the name Sparta until 1867. With a rail connection to Grand Rapids coming in 1872, the area prospers. During World War II, Sparta is home to German prisoners of war. Despite the situation, the warmth of the community extends even to their enemies. Prisoners writing home with stories of how well they are treated by the kind locals. About 4,000 people would call Sparta home.
In Sparta, like any small town, everyone knows everyone.
23-year-old Julia Dawson, a young mother to 2 boys and stepmother to 2 girls, has lived in and around Sparta her whole life. She's even close with the chief of police, Andy Milanowski.
My wife and I played on a co-ed softball team with Tammy, who was the mother of Julia. And Julia was young then, and she would come to the games and watch and whatnot. We had her watch our kids a few times because she was at that age. Every kid wants some kind of a job, make a little money.
She called me Mom. I loved her. She was like one of my kids.
𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗶𝗶𝗿𝗏 gets to know Julia when she becomes friends with 𝗠's daughter in 2nd grade.
So there were birthday parties and all of those fun things that Julia was at our house and my daughter Desiree was at their house. I mean, I just really enjoyed her company. I enjoyed working with her. You know, she was a good worker, good with the customers because she was happy and bubbly, and, you know, that's a good salesperson attribute. She was dependable and trustworthy, and she was a good girl to have in my store.
Julia is 19 years old when she strikes up a conversation with Tim Dawson over the internet.
Tim and Julia met online. Tim's coming out of a marriage of his own, and he has 2 kids. Things moved pretty fast for them. 2 weeks later, they met in person, and they started living together immediately. And within a year after that, they were engaged.
Tim installs phone systems in the Grand Rapids area, but the Dawsons make Sparta their home. Julia's friends and family are not impressed.
I never really got to know Tim. I don't remember spending any time with him at all. After they started dating, then she seemed to be more separated from me and from everybody, and it wasn't very long after that that she quit.
To me, Tim was pretty arrogant, and he was But he was, he was self-confident. I got the air of, I believe he thought he was just better than everybody else. Kind of a woman's man, he could smooth over any girl he wanted, things like that. Controlling. He'd want it his way.
She came to me then in the fall of that year, and she wanted a wedding dress. When she came, she had the hand mark on her neck, and then she had bruises on her arms. And I just looked at her, I'm like, Julia, what's going on here? And she said, oh, don't worry, things just got out of hand. It'll never happen again. He's really sorry. She says, no, it'll be fine. He loves me, and I just want to get married. And so then I told her I wouldn't sell her a dress. I said, I just can't participate in this because you're making a wrong decision.
After the wedding, Julia works the midnight shift at a plastics plant. She tells co-workers of her troubled marriage.
I think Tammy felt that this was a mistake from the start. Meeting a guy online that she never knew for a very long time, and it went really fast. And then how controlling Tim was. So she just saw that her daughter was under that spell. And once that, lovesick stuff wears off, then Julia started understanding it.
On December 10th, 2004, Julia phones her mother, Tammy, and tells her to get her room ready. She's coming home. Julia doesn't show up. The next day, Tammy receives a phone call from Tim. Tim calls Julia's parents and tells them Julia hasn't come back from a day of shopping. She's left him with the kids.
Tim asks Tammy if she's seen Julia, and she says no, she hasn't. Tim didn't seem overly concerned with the fact that Tammy didn't know where Julia was. After Tammy hangs up the phone from speaking with Tim, she has an inkling she may never see Julia again.
That same night, an officer with the Sparta Police Department discovers a suspicious vehicle at a local park.
He saw the van, and he went down and checked on it. And, of course, he ran the plate, find out where it was from, and found it was from 141 Maple. And looking in the van, he noticed that there was items in there, purse, I believe a diaper bag, stuff like that, in the van. But it was locked, and that's about as far as it went at that point until he got the call.
At 5 o'clock the following morning, Tim calls police to file a missing persons report.
I just had this gut feeling that this wasn't going to be she's going to come home.
When police arrived to interview Tim, he says both he and Julia were Christmas shopping on the day of her disappearance. They came home around noon, and Tim went for a nap. When he woke, Julia was gone and had left her 18-month-old child behind.
She would not leave without her child. She's very family kind of a person, and even though I didn't know her and see her with her children, I saw her with my kids, and I saw what kind of a person she was all of her life growing up, and she was just vivacious and bubbly and joy-filled and loving and funny, and she just was a wonderful girl. So I knew that she wasn't the kind of person that was going to take off without her child just on the spur of the moment.
We knew the kids were okay. There was no kids missing. It was an adult. She's now gone. And adults are adults. It's not a crime to go somewhere or to not tell somebody where you're going. We all know that most people don't do that. There's always in touch with somebody sometime during the day. But we just kept asking family, friends, and Tim to say if she comes home, then we need to know. In the meantime, nobody has seen her or heard from her.
Police quickly make the connection between the Dawson's home address and the address on the registration of the suspicious vehicle found at a local park the night before.
We start looking around, and the word gets out, and I can't tell you exactly how long it was, but there were search parties that started, and the community came together and started to search the adjacent area where the park where the van was, up and down the creek, the railroad tracks, in the woods, all around the north end of town, and came up with nothing.
Day after day would pass with no sign of Julia. Snowstorms would hamper efforts to search for Julia, but Sparta rallies together to send out search parties.
After work, I would get in my car, I'd drive up there and pray and you know, just try and see if we could find her. Just, where's our girl? Where's our girl? I went looking for her a number of times. I posted information about her with her photo, trying to find anybody who'd seen anything all over the place, because that was what I could do to help. I was working most of the time, couldn't really afford to close my store. So I'm like, okay, how can I help with this situation? So then I built the website, 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗲𝗿.org.
Tim ultimately makes a missing persons report with the police, but when he makes the report, he tells them that he's been all over town and looking at all those places that he expected her to have been at, but he couldn't find her.
I don't believe Tim ever showed up to the searches, which was odd to me. If your wife is missing and you love her, I think you'd be out there beating the bushes with everybody else.
By this time, several weeks have passed and several milestone events have taken place. Christmas and New Year's, her parents' anniversary. The entire town of Sparta has essentially been looking for her with no results. But suddenly Tim finds a clue in the house.
He had made a phone call to us and said he found her rings. And they were in the bathroom up in a cup on a shelf.
So one of the questions that has to be asked is why would somebody hide their wedding rings in a cup and then just disappear? It leads to the question of, is it plausible that she would just abandon their marriage at this point and leave those behind?
It would be 22 days before the village of Sparta would find out. Where's Julia? Sparta, Michigan. Population 4,000. During the 1960s, Sparta becomes home to a highly collectible record label, releasing 45s by many local acts, including Michigan Rock Hall of Famers, fostering an exciting culture of joy and wonder in the area. One that spreads to residents like Julia Dawson.
She was just vivacious and bubbly and joy-filled and loving and funny, and she just was a wonderful girl. So I knew that she wasn't the kind of person that was going to take off without her child just on the spur of the moment.
Julia's husband Tim wakes up from a nap, and Julia is missing. Police discover a van registered to Tim and Julia left locked at a nearby park. Inside, a diaper bag stuffed full of diapers, along with a purse. And then, a break in the case.
A few days after Julia's disappearance, a couple finds a coat on the side of the road. And they decided to bring it into the police.
In the pocket was a ID card, and that ID card came back to Julia where she worked. So with that, we started to concentrate, searching north. I spent quite a few hours myself walking the edges of the highways up there looking for her.
More than 3 weeks after Julia goes missing, a man walks his dog down a road he takes nearly every day. But this day, he makes a gruesome discovery.
I believe a car was coming, which is, in fact, that road does not get much traffic at all. The subject moved over onto the gravel with their dogs to let the car go by. And at that point, they were walking next to the guardrail, and they saw her on the other side.
Julia was found stripped naked, with the exception of a broken belt that was still around her waist. Her face was bruised and her skin was darkened, but other than that, there were really no other signs of violence or trauma. And it looked like her body had essentially been scrubbed clean.
When the head rests below the body, a certain pooling of the blood called lividity starts, and that actually creates a purplish sort of blue coloration to the skin. Postmortem is likely to blame for the discoloration of Julia's skin. She had been exposed to the elements of Mother Nature, meaning the sun and the snow, for a significant time, and that was approximately 3 weeks.
I wouldn't have been able to recognize her, facial recognition. She's face down. But she had a tattoo on her ankle area. We knew what kind of tattoo it was and where it was, and we did find one there.
On January 3rd, 2005, 22 days after Julia was last seen, her mother gets a knock on the door that no parent wants to receive.
Sparta's a small town, and rumors spread pretty quickly. Lots of people have their own suspicions about what happened. The question is, who would do this to Julia?
Despite the rumors and suspicion, no arrests are made. And then, a shocking accusation at Julia's funeral.
And then he gave his homily, and as he stood up there, he rather loudly said, "There is a murderer among us."
Everybody was there. It was pretty full service. But I do remember the minister saying that there was a murderer among us. I remember just feeling so ill throughout the whole funeral and just wanting to get away from his presence, not wanting to be in the same atmosphere as that man.
It got my attention, and I can see him, but I couldn't see his face, but I could see the back of his head. And he didn't, he didn't move. He just sat there. And you could kind of feel that tension in the church, because he didn't say there's a murderer among us out there. He said there is a murderer among us, which I felt like he was talking right there in that congregation.
The pressure is on to make an arrest, but there isn't enough evidence to arrest anyone.
The tips to police are now flying in fast and furious, and the pastor has made some comments that shocked the community. But police have now dredged up some new evidence that points to an entirely new set of suspects.
December 11th, 2004. After a morning of Christmas shopping with his wife, Julia, Tim Dawson says when he wakes up from a nap, Julia is gone.
Police often open tip lines so that the public has an opportunity to share any information they may have, but the information that the police receive isn't widely known to the community.
More than 3 weeks after being reported missing, the naked body of Julia Dawson is found face down on the side of a country road north of Sparta, Michigan.
The rumor mill might be rampant at this point, but the community is unaware that the police are actively working on evidence that points to 2 new suspects at this point.
We keep an open mind, because when you start getting tips, you got to look at all of it, because I really don't want to charge or convict an innocent person for something they might not have done. So it's always best to look at every angle. I'd say 2 or 3 what you'd call more solid.
A second suspicious vehicle is connected with the case. The night of Julia's disappearance, police see a car at the park where the Dawson's minivan was left.
Investigators have learned at this point that a vehicle of the same make, model, and color is registered to a 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗍𝗲. And 𝗠's been coming to Sparta more frequently recently under the guise of looking for some space to rent.
Could the woman who had set up 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗲𝗿.org and who had known Julia most of her life be responsible for her murder?
They had a detective who was following me for months, and I just laugh about it. And he's like, yeah, she has a really boring life, because it's like I work and I go home and I work and I go home, and maybe once in a while I might go out and have a drink with friends, but by and large I have a really boring life.
Investigators realize this possibility doesn't hold any water. They turn their attention to another scenario.
Police get word of the fact that Julia has been involved with this Grand Rapids kink scene, and they wonder if her activities in that group may have somehow led to her murder. Perhaps she met someone online who was part of this kink community.
An individual that is found face down and naked in the snow, such as Julia, had only one personal item found on her, which was her broken belt. Finding a woman that is naked outside, that is already a red flag and a suspicious death. We call in the forensic identification experts, and we would be working with the homicide detectives almost immediately.
Before she's found, Tim tells police he believes Julia has run off with someone she's met on a kink message board.
If we remember that Julia and Tim met online, this might be an explanation as to why Julia would leave her wedding rings behind.
Obviously, you look into that. From my recollection, we didn't find anything that would really remotely lead to the fact that she's that promiscuous or doing things, what he's trying to tell us. In fact, I think we found out the opposite, that she would tell some of her friends how he would abuse her, and even, I believe, abuse her sexually.
While other theories get ruled out, the evidence continues to mount against Tim Dawson as a suspect in his wife Julia's murder.
Up to this point, we and the detectives, I would say, pretty much caught him in several lies of different things about that night. One of them being that he went to look for her and drove a route looking for her, but he never went past, I believe it might have been 6 Mile Road. And yet his cell record showed that his cell phone was pinging off towers not in that area and well to the north of that area. And so we were thinking, well, you say you went down there, but your phone's pinging up over here. Why? I think it's because he went and dumped the coat at that point, and he was just trying to throw us off.
So one of the things that doesn't sit well with investigators when they first come to interview Tim is that he's preoccupied with something else. He claims it's a mess that's been made by the dog.
Officers tell Chief Andy Milanowski that there's a very large spot on the carpet that Tim has been cleaning with bleach.
You don't need to be a forensic expert or specialist to understand that bleach should never be used on a carpet.
Tim tells police his dog has worms and has left a stain on the carpet.
He told me it looked very suspicious. He said there was a very big cleaned spot on the carpet in the entryway, and it was pretty good size. He noticed a carpet sweeper, stuff in the sink, like hair and stuff, like he was cleaning out the sweeper.
All the evidence may suggest that Tim Dawson is suspicious, but none of it is enough to lay charges. And as soon as the coroner completes an autopsy on Julia, Tim has her body cremated.
According to Michigan state law, once the autopsy is completed, Tim Dawson can cremate Julia's body even though the investigation is still ongoing.
He was allowed to cremate her, which that made me angry as well, because I feel like in a situation like that where there's questionable death, obviously, then they should not be allowed to dispose of the evidence, that the evidence should be made available or accessible.
It's almost as if Tim is taunting the police at this point, and it seems as though he believes that if they were going to arrest him, they would have done it by now.
In April, Tim stops cooperating with police.
We had put a GPS on his truck prior to him leaving.
Tim Dawson has taken his kids from Sparta, Michigan, to a trailer park in Texas.
So it's around this time that Tim moves to Texas. He's packed up his kids and left Sparta. Police are aware that the investigation is growing cold, and they really need to find some evidence at this point.
The body of Julia Dawson is found on the side of a country road north of Sparta, Michigan. She's been missing for 3 weeks. Julia was beloved by many in Sparta, but her husband, Tim, draws the suspicion of many in her murder. Many believe Julia is abused by Tim before she is murdered, and by April of 2005, investigators point to Tim as the lone suspect in Julia's death.
Investigators are aware of the fact that the longer it takes to bring a case to a close, the more difficult it is to actually come to a resolution. And even though they are fairly certain who's responsible for this, they need a break in the case in order to move forward.
Results come in from the autopsy performed before Julia was cremated and provide vital clues about what happened.
What narrows down the approximate date and time of death is the contents that were found in Julia's stomach.
Back before, when Tim was still speaking to police about the investigation, he did mention details about their last meal together. So police actually went and found the contents of that meal in Julia's stomach.
The digestive system grinds to a halt when the person dies. So essentially, the body will still create gastric contact fluids, but it won't digest them. They would just sit stagnant within the stomach. The autopsy also reveals that there was a small ligature mark that was found around Julia's neck, and that there was a small fracture next to her left ear.
A local chiropractor tells police that Tim's young son was there the night of the murder. This likely places the boy at the scene where the body was dumped.
Evidence that was revealed within the autopsy findings did indicate that Julia, the cause of death, was confirmed to be by strangulation. The markings led law enforcement to believe Julia was murdered, stripped of her clothing, and then wrapped in plastic. They suspected that Julia's body was wrapped in plastic to maintain all of the trace elements of evidence before her body was moved.
The autopsy also uncovers markings on the skin consistent with the body being wrapped.
This would be consistent with a person intending on disposing a body.
The evidence is mounting and seems to point to Julia Dawson's husband, Tim, as being responsible for her murder.
Also the seat, when we looked in the van, checked the forensics check, the seat was way back, and Julia didn't drive with the seat that far back. The detectives asked the girl that rode with her every day to work, and she said the van was pretty much always, kind of filthy. And I'm not saying dirty, but I'm saying always got stuff in it, full of stuff, in the back especially. And when we checked the van, the back was just completely empty, except I think a tissue box. Tim's mother had said that the child, who was 18 months old at the time, I believe, came out of the bedroom with something in his mouth. And she wondered what it was, and she went over there to get it out so he didn't choke on it. It was the other half of the ring. And he had come out of the bedroom. It's only speculation, but I think we're pretty close on. I think that they had an argument. I think she took it off and threw him at him, and he only found one half, and the child found the other.
After 3 years of investigation, law enforcement believe there is enough evidence to make an arrest, but the local district attorney doesn't agree.
So there's actually no statute of limitations on murder. So what that means is in a case like this where the evidence at this point is too circumstantial for the district attorney to feel that there's enough evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, they can wait until more compelling evidence comes forward. For example, a confession that may appear at some point.
Sparta, as we've said, is a very small town, and there would be immense pressure from the community, never mind from Julia's family, to bring this case to a close, and the investigators are feeling the pressure of letting this go cold.
In an unprecedented move, the authorities bring the case to the Attorney General's office. Finally, more than 3 years after Julia's murder, an arrest warrant is issued for Timothy Dawson for the murder of his wife. Officers fly to Texas to get their man.
The look on his face was priceless. I tell you, it was a huge relief. Just think of some of the most, happiest moments of your life that you finally got something, or your first child or something. It was just, you're elated, you're relieved, but there's still a long road ahead.
All the evidence must now hold up in court if Tim is to be convicted of Julia's murder. Chief Andy Milanowski gets his man in Texas. Tim Dawson is arrested for the murder of his wife Julia 3 years earlier in Sparta, Michigan. A village of 4,000 located east of Lake Michigan, the people of Sparta mobilize to find Julia when she goes missing.
When Julia's body is found, the town obviously started to talk about it, and the overwhelming opinion at this point is that Tim is responsible, including by Julia's family.
With all of the resources that go into a prosecution, as well as the impact on the various parties involved, the prosecutor has to be absolutely certain that they have enough evidence to put before a jury to prove their case before they take it to court.
Defense attorneys paint the Dawsons' marriage as a normal one with ups and downs. They present letters Julia writes to Tim days before her murder. Julia writes that she would love Tim forever.
So the job of the defense in a criminal proceeding is to show that there is reasonable doubt in the prosecutor's case. So they're going to do whatever they can to pick that case apart and try to show that there is, at the very least, reasonable doubt there. So in this situation, the defense tries to argue that Julia was actually having an affair with a coworker and that they were seen together shortly before she disappeared.
The defense subpoenas 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗶𝗿𝗏 to stand for the defense.
𝗠's called by the defense to testify that her and Julia were part of the same online kink forum in Grand Rapids. This is relevant because there's some bruising on Julia's neck, and the defense is going to argue could be a product of this kink lifestyle and not of an abusive marriage. It's kind of a sneaky way to also get negative character evidence before the jury because while it is relevant to the bruising on Julia's neck, it's also possible that a jury is going to view membership in a community like this negatively against the victim.
Prosecutors introduce evidence that shows someone, through an anonymous phone call, attempts to cancel Julia's life insurance policy while Julia is still missing.
My first thought was, who else would it be? I mean, if you were to pass away, First off, I don't even know if you have insurance. Second off, what company would you be with? Third, I don't know anything about the policy. I don't know the number. I don't know anything about it. Only somebody with knowledge would have that ability to call and do that.
There's a bank statement that shows Tim transfers more than $8,000 from their joint bank to his own personal account before Julia's body is found.
So money that's withdrawn from a bank account following Julia's disappearance is still circumstantial evidence. It's possible that there's another very plausible explanation for that action. In this situation, it really is still circumstantial evidence that raises suspicion, but doesn't cause a direct link or direct association.
Convicted murderer Marvin Snyder takes the stand for the prosecution. Snyder is serving a bid of up to 150 years for the murder of his own wife.
Marvin Snyder is one of Tim's cellmates, and Snyder's doing a very lengthy sentence for the murder of his own wife. Snyder secretly journals the conversations he has with his cellmates.
According to Marvin Snyder's testimony, Tim becomes enraged after learning that his wife Julia is planning to leave him. Before she's able to take her son and get back to her mother's house, the couple begin to argue in the kitchen. Tempers flare. Julia's had enough and throws her wedding rings away. As she's about to walk out the door, things turn for the worse, and Tim loses control. Tim copies a case he had seen on a true crime television show, where the husband attempts to make the murder of his wife look like a random rape and murder. But first he has to clean up the evidence at his own home. He bleaches the carpets and then wraps Julia's body in plastic, hoping to prevent any blood or other evidence from being spread around as he transports her body. Then, by stripping and dumping her body, his ruse is complete. After returning home, Tim takes a nap before reporting Julia missing, a woman he had just murdered. In public, Tim plays the role of a concerned husband while the town of Sparta continues searching for Julia. Little does anyone know, Tim has already canceled Julia's life insurance policy. He then decides to leave town, moving to Texas to start a new life. But Sparta's law enforcement finally obtains the evidence they need, and a local district attorney is able to press charges. Tim is arrested. Unfortunately for Tim, he's just confided in the wrong man.
He tells the jury that Tim has confessed to Julia's murder.
Tim tells Snyder Julia was ready to pack a bag, take the kids and leave him. So he hit her, choked her to death, and then generally freaked out. Tim tells Snyder about cleaning the carpet with bleach. He then carefully wraps Julia in plastic before driving to dispose of the body and the rest of the evidence.
Basically, their main witness that they end up calling is a jailhouse informant, and it's a jailhouse informant who is serving time because he was also convicted of killing his wife. So basically, the jury's in a situation where they have an individual that was convicted of a similar offense, who wasn't believed at his own trial, and so they're now being asked to believe what Snyder's saying. So you have what would be considered an inherently unsavory witness that the jury's being asked to believe now.
Julia's parents, 𝗠𝘂𝗿𝗶𝗶𝗿, and the residents of Sparta hope law enforcement has done enough to convict. After hearing from 80 witnesses and reviewing 100 exhibits, almost 4 years after Julia had been murdered, the jury finds Tim Dawson guilty of murder in the first degree.
So the prosecution's jailhouse informant, Marvin Snyder, was successful. The jury did believe him and did convict Tim Dawson of the murder of his wife.
Well, that was just lot of hugs, a lot of happiness, yep, and sadness, all in the same. From what I could see, he was pretty much the same Tim. He had no emotion. But I do think that through his mind, he was thinking, I didn't get away with this. They got me. And I hope he thinks that way every day he wakes up.
The small town of Sparta, Michigan is still a friendly place. People move on from Julia Dawson's murder, but they don't forget.
I do know that it changed a lot of lives. A lot of people that were touched. I mean, it made me become far more active in working with the women that I saw coming through and to me who were dealing with abusive situations to stop the bleeding.
Well, I understand marriage vows, and I understand people get into marriage and they want it to work. And, you know, for richer, for poor, better, for worse, and all that. However, I don't think you sign up to be abused. Most of the time, abuse doesn't get better. I'm not going to say it never does, because people do change. However, in my experience throughout my career, 99.9% of them they just get worse. And you're not going to change that person.
The personality type is generally, at first, quite charismatic, and they kind of suck the girls in, and, you know, they have this kind of a persona that just is usually very fast, and usually they're just head over heels and have those rose-colored glasses on and fail to see the signs and fail to accept them even if they are seen.
They married you because they loved you, not the other way around. You're not theirs to control. So I would say seek help. You're not the only one. There's others out there. You may feel like you're the only one, but go talk to somebody about it. You'll find out that you're not.